feel like Kobe in the fourth quarter.
This is the Dane Moore NBA podcast. We are brought to you by Prize Picks, coming at you Tuesday afternoon. It's February 25th. After the Wolves 131-128 overtime win in Oklahoma City on Monday night. Woo! It was just one of those basketball games you don't see very often, and you don't really know you're watching it until it's over. It can kind of sneak up on you. I got Britt Robson here with me to try and make some sense in it, revel in it, I guess, a little bit. Britt,
Sure.
where you decided to start your column was as we were awkwardly talking to each other before we hit record. I was like, stop. Let's just start recording.
Sure.
There's a lot of different directions and places that we could go and will go to talk about this. But you started your column with who was on the floor when the Wolves began their insane comeback that snuck up on you.
Yeah.
What was it about that group that allowed themselves to even begin positioning themselves to come back into this game and have what is as crazy of a basketball game and comeback that we've ever seen with this team?
Well, the players on the floor had a combination of having something to play for, even if the team got waxed the rest of the night. Some of that is McDaniels just reveling in his new superpowers, and some of that is Dillingham and Shannon in particular wanting to stamp some minutes for themselves with some memorable play. And some of it is also the opportunity to play, against the best team in the Western Conference and to shine in a way. It's the second, night of a back-to-back. They just played that team. That's very, very rare, to have a home and home back-to-back against a team that has kind of become a rival. And I also just think that purposefully or not, and I think it was more happenstance than purposeful, there was just a lot of circumstances that added up well for the Wolves. I thought that Shannon and Dillingham both do well with a high pace, basket-centric thing. I know that Dillingham is reputed to be a three-point shooter and has that in his bag. I like it better when it's off to the side in his bag. I don't want it to be one of the first things he reaches for.
And it wasn't last night.
It wasn't. And a lot of that, I think, is because the Wolves' pace really made a difference in this game, and their desire and aggressiveness to get to the rim played right into the fact that Chet was out because he was on the second half of a back-to-back, and he's recovering from a fractured
hip,
whatever they call it, pelvis. I think that's what pelvis was the official on the medical thing, and for whatever reason, that nosebleed that Isaiah Hartenstein suffered early in the third quarter sidelined him for the rest of the game. So we don't know. Maybe it just could never stop bleeding, which is probably my first guess because it was really a torrent. And so, but then to have both of those guys out and to have the team be both exhausted from the travel, as were the Wolves, but also thinking to themselves, who wouldn't? I mean, I did, that they had it in the bag. And so until, of course, it got, I think it was like 16 points or something with less than 4 minutes to go. It was,
it was 121-105 when Ant subbed out of the game, which kind of seemed like the white flag. And that was with 3 minutes and 41 seconds to go. I mean, earlier it was like, trying to go through some of these. No, I mean, it was higher than that. I mean, Finch said in his press conference, he didn't feel like it was really, or he felt like it was gettable once it got down to 12, but it took a really long time. And Anthony Edwards off the floor, actually.
Right. And then it actually bounced back up for a little bit. And so that's the thing. It was, but I think what I wanted to focus on in the column I just finished is that there there was grit involved. If they could have very easily played out the string, made it garbage time, I never felt like the Wolves played a garbage time type game.
Jaden, man, Jaden. That was Jaden. That was leadership of Jaden, because that dude's a competitive motherfucker.
Yeah, and yeah, I would say actually I'd put him at the top of the list. I also think Shannon is a revelation, man.
Sure.
I mean, Lou Dort didn't want a second time with him.
Would you? I mean, it's crazy the way. All right, so let me just do like, so Nas gets hurt at the end of the third quarter.
Right.
He rolls his ankle, foot twists, whatever. Don't look good, you know.
It looked like a Mike Miller moment in retrospect, but that's all right.
Yeah. So the Wolves come out to start the fourth with Jaden McDaniels at the 5, Terrence Shannon Jr. is out there with them at the 4, Jalen Clark at the 3, Nickeil Alexander-Walker at the 2, Rob Dillingham at the 1, and that was the group that it seemed like they were going to be playing out the string with, right? And at that point, it's nearly a 20-point game. You kind of assume that that's what it's going to be, but that's you saw in that group, and specifically Nickeil at the beginning of that fourth quarter, that drive and that grit, and that like we're not just going to stop playing because for whatever reason. It started there, and I think that was huge. And then Nas and Ant. No, I mean, obviously it's a big deal that Ant comes back in, but that's his normal rotation.
Right, exactly.
Comes back in 5 minutes into the fourth quarter, and Nas comes with them.
Right.
So then that was for Clark mostly, you know, that Reid comes in and he's back.
Yeah, Clark and McDaniels subbed out when those two guys subbed in. Mm-hmm. McDaniels because he needed a break because he was playing
forever,
big, playing the front court and also guarding the perimeter. It was weird. I mean, he was both the big in some sets, but also like a super Rudy in terms of being like way out on the perimeter. Yeah. He was part of that wall that worked so well. And then, I mean, Ant and Nas, you both, they're not 100% obviously. Right. And so that is why I come back to McDaniel. I spent most of my column on McDaniels, Dillingham, and Shannon because they all played with a passion that elevated their game, and their elevation in general was unexpected enough to be a real ambush on people. I mean, nobody expects. Jaden McDaniels had 16 shots, 10 rebounds, 4 dimes, and no three-pointers. Mm-hmm. He played the game he wants to play, and he wasn't going to let anybody get in his way. Whether it was the coaching staff, his teammates, or the opposition. I mean, he was going to play the way he wants to play. And he had 3 and 1s.
3 and 1s, no threes.
Yep. The last one was the one that obviously sent the game into overtime. Yeah. And that was on Alex Caruso. He squared up on Alex Caruso, took him off the bounce, got the layup and the harm. I mean, that was... He had a lefty slam dunk off an interior feed. He had one of his rocking chair fadeaways. He had all kinds of, I mean, he just had the whole bag. And also what I found very significant is he was in on at least 3 set pick and rolls where it was just clearly a design play. The whole Mike Conley pocket bounce pass, well, both of them heading toward the rim. And he handled that really well. He missed one of them, but it was well executed. And then another one, he went through 2 guys. Another time he was in transition, he went right through 2 guys. Mm-hmm. Just bully balled one and scored over another. And he also, even when like Hartenstein was in the game, he had a couple of floaters that were in over Hartenstein. He is able to shoot over bigs. That is a sign of somebody who suddenly realizes, like if you're in like the 4th grade and you're by far the biggest kid in the class, and yet you're still trying to figure out, oh, here's how I'm playing this game. And all of a sudden you go, wait a minute now. If I do this and this and this, I'm bigger than most people, Just
throw it off the backboard to yourself and just keep getting the offensive rebound.
I mean, there was more than one occasion where he almost tipped in his own miss. He was Moses Malone briefly in a couple of those,
He was he was incredible, and I think and obviously we'll get back to the offense and how they closed the game with offense, but I think related to the Jaden piece of what he was doing offensively was the role that he played in the defensive side of the ball, what they were doing on defensively just against Shea in the fourth. I think that was
exactly
as much of a reason for the win as anything. And like I said, Ant comes in at 7 minutes in the fourth quarter, subs back out with 4 minutes left in the fourth quarter. Apparently his calf hurt, but again, it's back to back to down 16. I think it's kind of like done for the night, it seemed like. But what happened right before Ant subbed out is they're running that 2-3 zone, right? That the whole Wolves design was basically a 2-3 matchup zone, but use the 2 on the top to be a wall off of Shea not being able to penetrate into the paint. And before Ant subs out, he's at the top of the 2-3 there. He's one of the 2 up there.
He came in for Clark.
Mm-hmm. And do you remember the play where they got it to Caruso in the middle and Caruso went down and just kind of caught it at the nail, just went through for a layup? Well, that got through to Caruso because Ant left space within the wall there of the 2-3 at the top. And when Ant subs out, it's Jaden and Nikhil at the top, and it was a wall without any got the phone ringing there.
Yeah.
It was Ant and it was Jaden and Nikhil at the top creating that wall, and Shea wasn't able to get through it. It was like a zone, but 2 on the ball for him. And I think by Ant being out and those 2 being in, plus the 3 guys on the back line, Shannon, Nas, and Rob being very active in the back line of that 2-3 zone, the Wolves were able to not only get the ball out of Shea's hands, force it into guys who hadn't been shooting or touching it very much,
right?
But also sprinting around to contest it and to make it difficult there. I think Ant coming out was important in hindsight. Watching it back this morning that's kind of where it turned, because Nikhil and Jaden are just better at that at the top. And, I think even if Ant would have been back there at the back line instead of Terrence Shannon, he's probably not doing the same activity, you know what I'm saying? As Terrence did back there. And it was not only the right way to guard Shea, or proved to be the right way to guard Shea and get the ball out of his hands, a good bet by the Wolves coaching staff. I think the 5 guys that were on the floor when it was happening ended up being the best group to be able to do that. And I know Ant comes back into the game in overtime and gets that big block, but they were in man on that possession. That was not the 2-3 zone.
Right. And it was 2 games ago or 3 games, whenever they played Houston right out of the break, where Nas got in foul trouble, and there was a great debate about who to put on Sengun. I thought it should have been Shannon. It became like a kind of a whimsical thing to start for me. But the more I watched the game, the more I said, Shannon is a guy who some people just know how to create contact without getting fouls. Mm-hmm. And I just find him to be somebody who his natural game is hitting people. And that is an incredibly valuable skill. And what that means also is he absorbs contact in a way that maybe he gets a few less whistles, but he also gets the respect of the refs the other way. Like, this guy is a hard-nosed player. He maybe doesn't get as many whistles as he should on offense, but we're not going to penalize him because this is the way he plays, kind of thing. And every Jimmy Butler's that way. A lot of guys are that way. They have that sense. And I think in this particular case, where OKC didn't really have rim protection beef, and you could have, Shannon, he got like 6 rebounds as well in the fourth quarter. And a lot of those were clanks on misses created by the wall, and then the Shea kicking out to somebody who clanked the shot. And if he gets the ball on the rebound, man, you're going, And again, pace, you hear it talked about all the time that the Wolves are naturally a slow team. It's Rudy Gobert. I mean, 80% of it is Rudy Gobert. I'd say maybe 10% of it is Mike Conley. But those guys aren't there. Mike Conley was applauded for being a cheerleader last night because he would not have helped.
Right.
This was a team that needed to get up and down, that was looking for threes as much at the rim as they were behind the arc. They shot 2 3-pointers in the fourth quarter and 14 free throws. I mean, and had 22 points in the paint in the fourth quarter versus 8 for the Thunder, which is one of the biggest paint-centric scoring teams in the NBA. It just, if we pull back, I reveled in the game like we're reveling in the game now. Another column to write at some point in time, or we can talk about it if we want to at some point in time, is you see another template here. I'm a big identity guy. What is your team's identity? But the Wolves have not been able to stamp an identity with the same imprimatur that they had last year, that, there's not as much definition to it. And if we are, in fact, going to not have a emblazoned identity for this team, then if Finch is the coach everybody says he is, and he's got a great staff and the development people are really good, and they trust Tim Connolly to bring them talent, let's get our hands dirty figuring out what situations need what type of talent, put that talent on the floor, and see what happens. Because what we saw last night was a configuration that you and I wrote it, you just said it. It was the right group for the situation. You put that group out against another team and, it's not going to be the same. But you can mix and match with this personnel. The kids are better than they were given the rope to prove for a while. And and not that Finch is totally to blame. I think, there is this kind of chicken or the egg. Are they developing behind the scenes so they're ready when they come in, and so on and so forth?
I mean,
to some extent.
Yeah. It was like an identity of like fearless youth was what that was in that game. And I think to your point about, at the beginning of the season, you never saw that. I don't know if that group would get on the floor in a game in November,
right?
If they have the gear of fearless youth, if that's
right.
Weird
I mean, there would be a lot more growing pains. I'm assuming some of that growing happened at practice, happened during instruction development, and also, this is not to say in the next game that a lot of people are going to fall on their face, because it certainly can happen. That's one of the things about being very young. And
that's a good thing about having depth, is you can make adjustments off of that. This style of play might not be the perfect way to play again. What's the next game against the Lakers on Thursday?
Right, exactly.
There can and should be and will need to be. That's what I've just been saying the last couple episodes. It's just like, you now have more things in your bag that you can go to, and once these other pieces come back, I think the most important thing is to be dynamic in what it is you're doing, and I think that's where the ceiling has to come.
See, what I will say, and this is this is pure devil's advocacy, because I just literally said to you the opposite. But what about getting really proven, high salaried, very capable players back into their collective rhythm in time for the playoffs? I mean, and what is the cost of not doing that?
Let's grab our first break here. You mentioned it not being a Mike Conley opportunity, or not a spot for Mike Conley, and it was a spot for Rob Dillingham as a longest stretch of play we've seen from him, and I think that was a signal and something we should get into, because he too was a part of the identity of fearless youth, which is typically things that we've associated, with a Jaden McDaniels and Nickeil Alexander-Walker and even Jalen Clark. But Rob was absolutely part of that. I want to get to him. But first, let's grab our first break to let you know that today's show is brought to you by Treasure Island Resort and Casino. And I think Treasure Island would be a great place to go check out some college basketball in March when you're watching March Madness. If you've ever done a trip, to go maybe to Vegas or something like that for March Madness, you're doing that to have, the big sports book and the screens and the environment there. And Kyle and I did a live show at Treasure Island, and when we kind of went down there before to check it out, I was surprised by how similar it was there in that environment that they have, the kind of sports book setup feel that they have around the bar, and it would just be a great place to watch March Madness. Also, Treasure Island has a ton of promotions going on for the month of March. When you're there and you use your player's card, you're racking up points in the month of March, and they are giving $440,000 away of promotions that month, including 4 winners of a $60,000 Chevy gift card. So it has the promotions as an incentive to be able to be there. But I think even maybe if you don't gamble at all, and you just want a place to watch the NCAA tournament, I really think Treasure Island would be a great spot to check that out. For more information and a full list of upcoming promotions, visit ticasino.com. Today's show is also brought to you by Prize Picks, and I am definitely going to be watching the Lakers and Mavericks game this evening. I was kind of looking to see how much they juiced up Luka Doncic's numbers, his more or less than 31.5 points, more or less than 48.5 points, plus rebounds, plus assists. I think these are the type of games, where you're just tuning into a kind of a random national TV game or something like that. And, you just put $5 on, some predictions that you have related to the game. If you think Kyrie's going to have more or less than 26 points in that game, LeBron, Austin Reeves has been going for them. It's a fun thing to kind of like picture the matchup and be like, all right, who has more opportunity here that I would, see them to be above their averages, and who might be. I kind of like doing the other side of it. I'm like, all right, well, how would this matchup like limit a player, have them take less shots, play fewer minutes, and those sort of things to find the less thans. But I would recommend checking that out today. For Lakers, Mavericks, you can go to prizepicks.com or the Prize Picks app to create an account. If you don't have an account already, use the promo code Dane that lets them know that you came from me. And when you do, your account is credited with a $50 sign-up bonus when you place your first $5 lineup. All right, Britt, Rob Dillingham. He checks in with 4 minutes to go in the third quarter and basically plays the entirety of the rest of the third quarter.
Yep.
The entirety of the fourth quarter until the very last possession of regulation that brings
defensive
Clark
switch
in.
for Clark, right?
Yep. Mm-hmm. And then Rob's right back in there, and he plays the first 4 minutes of overtime and subs out with a minute left. Ant's back into the mix there. And but what is that? So it's about 16 straight minutes.
I think he had 29 for the game, which is a healthy chunk.
Yeah, so that would have been 20. He had 20 minutes basically straight from the end of the third quarter to when he subbed out with a minute left. And it was right away from when he checked in there. Like, I do it during the games. I'm trying to, and at that point of the game, I was looking for things for us to talk about.
Sure.
This is not a good game.
Right.
And I just started going on Rob, and I was just like, okay, he did this. Let's talk about Rob tomorrow. And what really stood out to me right at the beginning of the third quarter is that dude looked angry, just was playing angry. And I don't know exactly what was behind all of it, but like, hell yeah, man. Like it was effective angry, like playing with the force, playing with we haven't got to see Rob Dillingham play that much. Frankly, we haven't really interviewed him that much. I don't really feel like I know him that well, but I do really get the sense of a supreme confidence that he has within him that we sometimes, you talking about grit earlier. I think sometimes we associate grit with strength and force and size, but small players can have grit as well. I think Mike Conley is a player who has grit. Rob has grit, but also just fit so well into the identity of that group with Reid and McDaniels and Shannon and frankly, and this is just a miss, I guess, on me, but more than I would have thought. I thought that was an incredibly important marker in the season for Rob Dillingham. Even just those 5 minutes of the third quarter, I was like, okay, Rob. And then obviously he plays it out and is the point guard for the biggest comeback and, franchise history. Shout out to him, man. I've definitely, I wouldn't say like on the side of doubting him, but I've all season have been more like leaning towards I get why the role is what it is. It was cool to see Finch give him an opportunity and let him roll all the way through it. There was some turnovers in the midst of that. There was some spinning. One time he's spinning at the basket, gets stripped by J-Dub, goes the other way. Finch let it go and was rewarded for that, which is, as a lot of people had a critique of Finch in previous games, the Houston game when he got yanked there. Finch didn't do that. And Rob delivered, and in turn, Finch was rewarded for that decision. And while I'll remember this game probably most for Jaden McDaniels, Rob Dillingham was just as much, or was a huge piece of the overall feeling of what that game was.
Here's the most important thing, in my opinion. He fits with guys who are in the future.
Yeah,
that's who he fits with. I mean, yeah, he plays fine with Rudy, and he feeds Rudy, goes out of his way to do that. And if he and Mike weren't so small, they would probably. I mean, they temperamentally, I think, would fit together. But have you seen the numbers with Nas? Nas and Dillingham are phenomenal. And Nas plays well with everybody, but. Yeah. I was looking up Nas and Jaden numbers. Partly, you told me, hey, they're really good. So I looked them up, for this particular thing because Nas and Jaden together were really important last night too. But what I was seeing almost ahead of the Nas and Jaden numbers were these Nas and Dillingham numbers in terms of net rating are pretty amazing. And it makes sense. Fast pace. Ever since Jalen Noel and the Iowa Wolves, Nas has been somebody who likes to throttle down, and anybody who watches him, quick decisions, really quick handle, likes to finish at the rim, likes to pretend he's going to finish at the rim and just immediately splash a three, doesn't hesitate on three-pointers, doesn't hesitate on drives to the hoop, and has become an increasingly important defender. It's interesting to me when I did look at those McDaniels, Nas numbers, and I didn't have room to get into it because I was just trying to get this piece out today. But essentially, where the big difference comes, they're kind of team average together on offense. When they're on defense together, they're dominating on defense with their net rating. That's where their net rating is coming from, and so that's kind of cool too, given the fact it's a small front court. Yeah. But that's also somewhat a wrinkle in the.
But to your point, that fits with the future idea, right? Of what I always say, when Ant's 26, he's probably not going to be sharing the floor with Rudy Gobert or a center who's like Rudy Gobert. It's going to look more like a group that played like that group last night.
Yeah, like the guy is like 2 years older than him, Nas Reid, and the guy 1 year older than him, Jaden McDaniels, and the guy 3 years younger than him, Rob Dillingham. I mean, that's the blueprint here is looking. I'm feeling better and better. Even before last night, I was feeling better and better about the pieces that are surrounding this team. I get why you extended Rudy, and it really did help to knock that $12 million off this year's cap, the 25, 26 cap. But that is going to be an interesting thought experiment as we go along. And it factors into what we're talking about right now in terms of how you toggle lineups, what you do, because Rudy is a creature of habit and he is a creature of trust. And he wants to play with the people he trusts. And when he gets a group he trusts, he's really, really good. But that also makes him less flexible than other players. Sure. He's the opposite of Nas. Nas, I'll say this over and over again, one of the best things about Nas is he fits with everybody. That is so rare. I mean, that's a stars stat. When somebody's always better with, it doesn't matter. Everybody who plays with this guy gets better somehow.
Right.
Which again makes it paramount that the Wolves, having sacrificed Cat to make this happen, need to set the nail on that and make it happen this offseason, which I'm sure they will. But back to my point, we like Rob Dillingham now because he's got all the skill and he looks really good. But when we get excited about him, we find that it's oftentimes because he's playing in a style with people who are young and future oriented. And once that group gets experience, you've got Clark, you've got Shannon, you've got, Nas and Jaden and Ant. The oldest player on the floor in the fourth quarter last night was Nickeil Alexander-Walker. He's 26.
Yep. Yeah, it's one thing I want to talk about Nas, but let's the Rudy thing to kind of because you brought that up.
Sure.
I think like there are all of these fair thoughts about, is Rudy, how long is he in the picture for?
Right.
At what point does that style of center not make sense? Whatever. The cool part about the rest of the season, or just the reality of the rest of the season, is they're going to try to fit him into this style, right, or the style of this.
That will be fascinating.
Right. That's all I'm saying. I'm not for all the reasons you laid out. I'm not like confident it's going to work great, right, but you just have this situation for the final 25 games of the season, and they're not going to just stop playing Julius Randle and Rudy Gobert once they're back. They're going to try to effectively incorporate them into something that feels a little bit more like this. They're going to have to. Finch has kind of said as much. They're not going to just go back to playing the way that they were playing in November, because
the 8 starters.
Well, there's that, but it's like who the 8 starters are,
right,
like as individuals, has changed, because Nas Reid and Jaden McDaniels have undeniably changed who they are as players and how they're playing as players over these since January 1st. Right. When, if you look at all the underlying numbers of this team, that's when the numbers spiked, is January 1st. And over these last 7 weeks, this has been a really good team as those two players have shifted stylistically. We've talked about Jaden. Jaden's averaging like 19 a game since Julius Randle went down. Okay, so Jaden is now has a different role. He's playing the 4 more. He's off the ball more. The Jaden averaging 19 points a game over the last 11 games will tick back those 11 games. You know what that is? That's the game that Julius gets hurt and Jalen Clark moves into the rotation permanently, which takes Jaden out of his position of on the ball, point of attack, doing all of those sort of things, having the freedom, to just have some more energy, some mental energy, maybe all of these different things to be able to take and embrace a different role that he's just never had the opportunity to have. That's how Jaden has changed, I think, assisted majorly by Jalen Clark, who's now on the ball. Nas has changed as well. And the cool thing about Nas, and why I believe this one's really sustainable, is that it started happening before the Julius injury. Mm-hmm. And we're seeing these signs of more Nas, more of the best things Nas is doing, because he became more of a focal point of the offense.
Right.
Even back in again, before Randle was hurt, and became more of a focal point of the defense as they started leaning more and more into Reid at the 5. Back then, it was Randle at the 4. It wasn't small ball. But Nas has become a focal point of this team on both sides of the ball in 2025 in ways he wasn't in 2024. And I said to Jace maybe 2 weeks ago, I was like, who even is like the comp for Nas Reid? Like what, what player is it? And I was like, I'm going through like centers in the league, and I was like, the best comparison I could find, which is a terrible one, is Brook Lopez, because he shoots a lot of threes and is like a kind of good rim protector and can do things on the interior. But obviously, you watch Brook Lopez and Nas Reid play, and those are, apples and oranges of how they do that, how they move to get there.
Right.
What Jace said was, Steph Curry. And that was about the off the dribble stuff. And we're both like such a, I mean, there's truth to both of those things. Obviously, it's not.
I'll give you the first one that comes off my head.
Because I got a new one too.
Okay. I would say a miniature Wemby.
Elaborate.
Well, a guy who roams, a guy who kind of feels like he should be a guard, but doesn't mind getting down there, a guy who can impact the game on defense, is quicker than you think, is somebody who tries to avoid being bullied by moving his feet, moving his body, is a good passer, has coordination, is a glue guy in terms of the team. Nas, obviously, like it's as exact as Steph Curry. I mean, it's not like equal match. Yeah. But what I would say is that you want a multi-purpose guy. You want a big who can play essentially 2 through 5. And Wemby can do that. And Nas can do that. And the biggest difference between them is that Wemby utilizes his height and Nas utilizes his speed. But they both actually have kind of a similar approach to shot mix. The problem is Wemby's looks a lot worse because he's not nearly as accurate from deep, but he understands the importance of the 3 points. And he gets up and down. He's a team player, but also kind of has a score first mentality. I don't know. Obviously Nas is more experienced. Nas is more seasoned in terms of what he does. And Wemby's Wemby's ceiling, I should say, is much, much higher.
Right.
But just in terms of, packaging, I might also say Al Horford, although, that again is kind of Horford's old, but, he has that multi-dimensionality. He can defend well, but not in the traditional way. Those are probably the two that come to my mind.
Mine is Jason Tatum.
Well, that's my comp for Ant a lot. So
your Ant comp is Paul George
and Jason Tatum. Yeah.
Well, so I think Tatum's a 4. Nas is a 4.
Right.
Tatum, from a shot mix standpoint, and from being able to create on the perimeter.
Right.
Create his own shot for a 3 on the perimeter. That's a huge part of Tatum's game. Mm-hmm. And what I never thought of the Tatum one prior to this more recent stint from Nas, because we've never seen Nas be a focal point with the freedom to go and get downhill, which if you watch the Celtics, as kind of the game goes on, or particularly at the end of the game, it's more through Tatum to be a penetrator and an at the basket thing. And that's, if I had to say the one thing from Nas that is new for me, as incredible as the step back threes and the percentage that he's hitting the threes are at, it's the at the basket game, because I've actually seen those step back threes before. I've seen him hit at that clip overall from deep. It's the ability to use size and force at the forward position to get downhill, but in the middle of the floor and get as deep as you can to the basket. I mean, none of these are perfect. I understand we're comparing an undrafted player to, we've now done Steph Curry, Victor Wembanyama, and Jason Tatum. But it just goes to showcase that there are really special threads of Nas's game that legitimately do resemble some of the best things of the best players in the league.
Yeah. And I mean, a more obvious comp for a lot of different reasons. If you want to just get pedestrian about it, he's a lot like Malik Monk too, I mean, just in terms of somebody who gets you a bucket in a variety of different ways, is steadily improving on the sly. But the greater point, I think, is that, I mean, I said this at Falling Knife the other night live. It just came out of my mouth without any thought, but he's the second best player on the Timberwolves. I don't even think it's a debate anymore. And that's a team with Rudy Gobert on it, which was the guy at the beginning of this year I would have clearly said is the second best player on the team. Right. I would rather have Nas Reid than Rudy Gobert on my roster. if both of them were the same age and projected out 4 years. Sure. I just think, and I understand the people who don't like Nas point to the constantly biting on the up fakes, constantly sometimes being too fidgety with his feet on defense.
He just times out sometimes in the first half of last night. I mean, it was not good. I mean, really struggled offensively.
Yeah, but that's okay because I mean, the numbers over time have proven that everybody's going to have some off night shooting.
I'm just saying if we're picking nits.
Yeah. But I mean, I actually think that the up fake thing, getting him in the air, that should be on every scouting report, and that is a flaw that he's smart enough and the staff is smart enough to get rid of. If not this year, certainly the beginning of next year. Just stay down. Go talk to Kyle Anderson, who's the master of it,
Yeah, sure.
So, but I do think that this guy was a brilliant Gerson Rosas, Sajan Gupta selection. And it makes that draft, Ant, Jaden, and Nas, that is one hell of a draft.
Yeah, man. That's it really is. And it does make you kind of believe in, this Dillingham, Shannon, and Clark draft class that they're all kind of rookies now.
Right.
They are rookies now.
Clark was a year before, but I get your point.
And you go to the future of the team.
Right.
And we have a recent example of a young group coming in and over the course of 3, 4, 5 years growing together and growing in a stylistically similar way. I'm not sure if Ant, Jaden, and Nas were all on different teams that they would all be playing the way they do now, or the way they do collectively. It's they kind of seem
what it is. I've had enough coaches tell me this, both head coach Finch every year and the assistant coaches when I did the assistant coaches piece. Those summers where Jaden and Nas are in the gym together when there's nobody around and the gyms are probably sweltering, and then they go out somewhere and have a beer, and everyone else, somebody's in Barbados and somebody else is in France, and they're in Minneapolis in July working on their games together. And that, to me, is why their games are similar, because they learn from each other as they grow. Mm-hmm. And Ant is a part of that. I think Ant is enough of a gym rat. He noticed what was going on there. And he probably has got way too many things on his plate to be fully a member of that Musketeer club, but he wants to be there in spirit. And he references the work that Jaden in particular puts in and that Nas puts in. And it's because of those summers where these guys just, they didn't ask to be shouted out for it. Nobody ever said, they don't say, hey, I was here all summer while everybody else was doing this. But I mean, I heard it. Finch's first interview I did with him, he talked about Jaden, working all summer. Mm-hmm. And, Jaden's got a kid now, and, a lot of things have changed. And he really did. I mean, we talk about all the ways that Randle trade, put sand in the machine. For Jaden, it was enormous. He was suddenly a catch and shoot 3-point shooter. And as we have now seen, I mean, that is such a horrible thing to do to Jaden McDaniels. It's like, putting, Dillingham at the 3 or something. I don't know.
Yeah. I started covering the team when Tibbs was the coach, and you can probably speak to this going back a lot further.
Sure.
But I know during the Tibbs years, no one was here. No players were here in the summers and of that group. And it was I remember talking to Jeff Teague one time about Minnesota summer. It was his third year here, and I'm like, yeah, because it was the winter time, and he's like, really cold day or whatever. I'm like, yeah, but the Minnesota summers. And he's like, I've never been here in the summer. And that is culture, right? It's like those are the areas that culture is built. Of course, it's built during the season on the planes and traveling and the way they live their life, but it's developed friendships, for sure, genuine ones that I think do show up in situations like this. I think the Nas and Jaden friendship at just like collaboration there is part of the reason why we've been able to find anything kind of intriguing about these, last 10 games when everybody's been hurt, because those two guys believed that they could be something together enough to be able to compete with anyone. And, now they beat OKC twice in the last 4 games. I mean, it's really
shout out to me thinking they weren't going to win any.
Another thing I want to talk to you about, I don't think overall it was a very good Ant game, and again, I don't know what happened with his calf, but we would be remiss to not talk about specifically the block at the end of the game. And we were both in Indiana, both traveled together.
Yeah, nothing compares to that.
Yeah, but true. But it is part of a greater thing with Ant, where there is this ability to elevate, literally and figuratively, at the end of games. That I was just watching. I tweeted it. I was like, that I've never seen before. I have never, because he is already so packed with strength and athleticism that his mean is incredible just to watch him play physically. I just really love watching a great player do something even greater when the money's on the table, right?
That's right. Yep.
And again, I think they're in that game because Ant got subbed out because they needed him to not be. He's not a good zone defender. That's not his strength defensively. Right. I think it was huge that he was out of the game, brought him back in. But that play at the end, when they again weren't in zone, and Ant understood because he's played, he's learned that, comes over as the kind of low man functionally there, and defends the pick and roll and meets the finisher at the rim, and those things, whenever it is, 5-10 years from now, when we're talking about whatever Ant has become or hasn't become, I mean, this is just how it works. Those are the things that you remember, and that's that's whatever that is the, I don't know, it's like the core of who Ant can become and ultimately be.
And what I will say about the 2 blocks, the one in Indiana last year and this one, is the elevation is just stupendous. I think if he jumps like a normal human being, Shea finds a way to get his body or his arm into him. Yes. He was just so high up that he could not. He was too high for the lower trunk of the body to make much difference for Shea.
And with the force of it, the power of the height.
Exactly. And so, and the other thing about this one compared to the Indiana one was it wasn't totally a freelance job. He was supposed to come over. It was part of the system, but he came over so rapidly because Shea was so quick. He got through 3 guys so that Ant had to realize pretty quickly, hey, it's coming to me now if I don't get over there. And Shea, actually, Ant moved so fast. Shea was at the front of the rim rather than even veering right. He wasn't worried about Ant because Ant wasn't in the picture really for him. He had already gotten past 2 guys. I watched it a couple of times just to see, what it looked like. And it was a great block. We just had, we were in Indiana. We were up in the stands, so we had that peer down angle that is so effective. I've learned now for replays because you get to see actually angles and stuff that you don't see linear wise when you're down low. And we just saw that guy jump so high that he had to worry about hitting his head on the backboard.
He did,
and actually did hit his head on the backboard, but only while ducking. He would have probably separated his shoulders on the backboard in that thing. And so it was such a huge block. And it remains probably the single greatest athletic feat on a basketball court I've ever seen.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's I or we probably, do a lot of time spent on the Ant stuff of like, oh, he's not doing this. And if he did this, it would very obviously lead, to that. It's the
Right,
nature of
right,
closely watching a player who's not in their prime, but has signals of what their prime
right.
is. And it's just these things are a reminder of the set all that aside, just kind of like the joy that can come from watching him, because 2 nights after the Indiana block, he literally broke his finger on John Collins's face dunking on him. I mean, it's I just need to remind myself sometimes of how unique this is,
Right.
that of what it is that we're getting to watch.
Well, one of my favorite stats, and I'm sure it won't be broken by anybody anytime soon, in my opinion, um, is that he led the NBA in 3-point makes in more than 1 month, and led the NBA in like free throw attempts another month or so. I mean, like he can get where he wants to get almost all the time. If somebody had a talk with him and they said, okay, the threes have been great, but now we need a little bit more of this in the mix. It's kind of like Will Chamberlain suddenly deciding he was going to start dishing the ball and leading the NBA in assists. It's some guys are just so inordinately skilled that they can do what they do. And of course, what we want is we see the highlights, and we also see enough of the cream that we want it all to be cream. We think that if it's not cream, then he's not trying, or he's not X, or he's not Y. And we take, I think, what it takes to perform at such a high level. There is a mental endurance as well as a physical endurance that I don't think we recognize. He's got it sometimes. I mean, there are times when I just want to watch Law and Order on TV. Why is that? Because, without knowing it, I just, I want to do something vegetable-like,
Yeah.
And there are times, I'm sure, on the court where Ant just kind of wants to be a vegetable, and because he's got to recharge in some way, shape, or form.
Yeah, and it's that is just as much of the growth from being an all-star to one of, if not the best players in the league once you hit the sort of prime of your career. It's this puzzle that we're putting together, and has missing pieces, but you see what you could tell what the design of the puzzle is. And again, and even sometimes in a game that you're not super impressed by what it is that he's doing, or he isn't even the primary reason that they won that game. It would have been the most encouraging to have Ant had been out there, with that young group and driven
But
it.
you know what? I don't think that they would have been able to flower as much.
See, and that's an interesting thing too in that.
Yeah. But one of the things I thought was really cool is that Ant's on the sidelines, right? And that team slowly but surely makes a comeback. He comes back out. Dillingham is at the top of the keys, sips it over to him. Ant takes a couple of dribbles and gets it right back to him. And Dillingham heads for the hoop. I mean, that's like hey, it's your game right now, buddy. I'm just a high profile teammate right now.
Yeah.
And that's great sportsmanship and leadership from your alpha star, but it is also a sign of a good dude, a sign of why that guy is beloved in that locker room. You don't hear very many people talking about Ant behind his back in a bad way.
Right. This one's kind of twofold. And you alluded to it at the beginning, but the Wolves getting away from the three and getting to the basket really drove them getting to the free throw line, which drove a lot of the win. The Wolves had 32 free throws in the second half plus overtime, which was a stylistic decision. The Thunder only had 15 free throws in the second half plus overtime. And obviously Finch after the game kind of was complaining about the way that the Thunder.
You didn't get enough of them.
Yeah, right. I do think behind those numbers is there was basketball reasons for it, that the Wolves had the Thunder in the zone. It made it harder for Shea to do what he does, like Harden did before, and Embiid did too, by drawing fouls and getting to the line. I do think the biggest story of it, though, was the Wolves doing something themselves to get to the free throw line. Probably got a good whistle a couple times. That one where Nas got to the free throw line.
Yeah.
Maybe Wallace stripped that one, and then ended up fouling Wallace out of the game. But what did you? I say that to mean I think that's the true story behind the free throws and the fouling of what was going on, at least in the second half last night. What did you make of Finch's comments on it?
Well, everybody has noticed that Finch is a lot grumpier with the refs this year. And I don't think it, I rip players when they become too obsessed with officiating. And that is a rippable, I'm ripping Finch now because I think that it does not help. I think that if you judiciously go at something, what happens is I think he gets wrapped up in the game, and then suddenly everything becomes something to talk about, to keep the narrative going. Hey, I've already made this point. Now I can really make this point because there's an example right in front of me. Well, the guy is an officiate. He does this for a living. He knows what you just said, and he knows what just happened. If you start to remind him, then what you're doing is you're taking away your own advantage. And so I don't like it. I don't like the sore winner attitude after the game of, hey, we made this incredible comeback. And, let me say in the middle of this historic thing where it makes everybody ecstatic, that it was about time that they started blowing the whistle on OKC. And, fortunately, they don't play the Thunder again until the postseason, if that happens. But it isn't a good look for this team. And other people have said this, and I'm not sure I believe it as strongly as they do, but if you're a coach, you're setting an example for your players. You can't really tell people to hold your tongue with the refs if you can't hold your tongue with the refs. Mm-hmm. And so Ant's got 13 or 14 Ts now, and he's going to get suspended one of these games, and you just have to hope it's not the difference between a 6 seed and a 7 seed.
Yeah. I like how you tied it to the bigger officiating, quote unquote, issue that this team has had this season, because there has been one, right? And but they have, it has gotten in their way at times. I don't think it did last night, but it does seem that they would do well to have a better relationship with the officials, and Finch is a big part of that. Now, that said, I'll read off what the actual quote is. I think there's something behind what he's saying about specifically Shea and OKC. He said, quote, "It's so frustrating to play this team because they foul a ton. They really do. They foul all the time. And then you can't really touch Shea. It's a very frustrating thing, and it takes a lot of mental toughness to play through it." Again, I agree with you. Was that exactly the right time? I think he was just hot in the heat of the moment for that. I do think there's truth to that, at least the last line, and it takes a lot of mental toughness to play through it. Mm-hmm. Just as was true with James Harden, just as is true with Joel Embiid. There is an element to guarding those players like Shea who know what they're doing and have a whistle that benefits them accordingly, kind of just because the officials have seen these players do the same thing over and over again. They're almost looking for it, simply out of it being a repeatable thing that Shea does every time, Embiid does every time, Harden does every time. And if we could kind of separate the overarching issue the Wolves and Finch have with the officials and just focus on the end of that, I think that is an accomplishment in that game, that they did have the mental toughness to play through it, and that they found a defense that they could guard Shea without fouling him. I think they overcame something in this game. I think there's truth to that, even if it ties to a semi sort of toxic underlying notion that this team has right now.
Yeah. First of all, let me say that I think that Embiid is worse than Harden and Shea. I've never liked Embiid is one of those guys that if a guy has his hands out, he throws himself into his hands, and gets away with it. And the fact that he's slower than Harden and Shea, and so doing it makes it even more aggravating. And one of the things I've noticed that Shea does is if somebody puts his hands on him, he will turn into that and then kind of flail back.
Yeah.
But the hand is on him. So what you learned is you don't put your hands on Shea. And if you're smart enough to have that happen, that's great. But that's a different thing than you don't put your hands out into air in front of somebody, which is what happens to Embiid. The point being that Shea Gilgeous-Alexander not only is great at that, but he is great enough to put himself into situations. His ability to wend through people off the bounce, his ability to see what's happening on a pick and roll and make his move in the leveraging of the pick and roll at just the right time. Mm-hmm. All these subtle things that go into it. It's more than just somebody, I'm going to flop. We've seen guys who do that, I mean, Dillon Brooks is probably the most egregious guy of saying, hey, I'm going to, I'm going to get fouled now. I think that I just really like the Thunder. I like their discipline. I like the way they have their game sewn together. I obviously like them a little too much because I totally overestimated the fact that I thought they were so clearly superior to the Wolves, who have just beaten them 2 out of 3 without some personnel involved too, I might add. But I do really admire the integrity of the team, and I think that SGA is the leader of that. And I think that, like Jokic, we ignore the genius of this player at our loss. We are at a loss if we don't understand that they are extending the beauty of the game. If SGA never gets to the line one time, he's still a joy to watch. Mm-hmm. And I will also say, finally, that you don't have big comebacks in the NBA unless somebody is lights out from 3 or somebody is getting fouled a lot. And those are the 2 ways you make it up in a hurry. And the Timberwolves were brilliant at Terrence Shannon Jr. is a force, man. That guy is that's an NBA skill. His physicality is NBA caliber right now, and it's a skill that will play
right,
even if his other skills, don't necessarily grow in leaps and bounds. The fact that he can fearlessly go at people and make a ref really try to figure out who committed the foul, that is, that's a lot of fun to watch. And the fact that Caruso, who is as good as anybody at kind of playing that line of did he foul him or did he not, tried to move ever so slightly, and the guy just has a talent for contact that makes it should make any Wolves fan glad that he's on their team, just as any OKC fan should be thrilled that SGA's on their team. Not that they're comparable.
It does feel like, to the Wolves side of it, the free throws, and I think Shannon's a great example of it. There does seem like there's been something contagious about playing with force. Or they've just been playing with greater force these last few games, because we all know what this Terrence Shannon Jr. force to the basket looks like. I mean, it's crazy. There's some rookies that come in the league and they can jump as high as anyone, and there's some rookies who come to the league and can run as fast as anyone. I was thinking about this last night, but it's very rare that a rookie comes into the league and plays as strong as anyone. Actually, Lou Dort would come to mind as in a different sort of way, who comes to the league and is like that. And I know Terrence Shannon Jr., is 24 years old. So he's not your,
Sure.
I don't know if he would have played as strong if he would have came to the league when he was 19, but it's still cool to see immediately that he has that, and that Nas and Jaden are also playing with so much force at the basket. I think Jalen Clark, even when he's forced to do so, the only way he even puts himself in position is to go through the defense. And frankly, like, this team just hasn't had that.
Right.
They didn't even have that last year, really, other than obviously Ant plays with a force to the basket.
What I really noticed in the first 6 weeks of the season was that Julius Randle played with force and everyone else did not.
Yeah.
And it was so obvious. And they were only playing 8 guys. But what that meant was 7 guys were not playing with force at all. And it was very obvious.
Yeah.
And it's one of the reasons I thought, well, he gives you that dimension. What happens with Julius, though, is that he begins to really turn it kind of into a game within a game, like Jaden does on defense. If somebody is guarding him, okay, you stop me that time. You're not stopping me this time. And he's not going to pass it.
Right.
Or if he does pass it, it's going to be one of those ones where his off the jump, his foot coming down is like a quarter inch off the ground. So he has to throw this weak ass pass to somebody on a kick out. So I agree with you. Dillingham plays with force. For a little guy, he plays with a lot of force.
Mm-hmm.
Shannon plays with a lot of force. So hats off to Tim Connolly. We just got through talking about Rosas's great draft. That's shaping up to be a really good draft, given where they were in those picks. Playing with force, when you have a guy like Ant, if your team is a forceful team, then Ant isn't as much of an outlier. He's going to get more calls, I think, because of that. And also, there are times when Ant is going to be hot from 3, and you're not going to have that force element. Mm-hmm. And the fact that they had that force element, to me, it was the dominant trait on offense in the fourth quarter last night when they won 41-19 and had 22 points in the paint and 14 free throws against a really good OKC team, albeit really tired. That was a game of offensive force, and that is a great template to have in your bag when you don't have your 2, big, Randle and Gobert, and, Ant is not having it that night. Jay McDaniels all of a sudden playing with force.
Right.
Nas Reid playing with force. Shannon playing with force. It's fun. And DiVincenzo, I will say, also plays with force, especially on defense.
You mentioned Randle and DiVincenzo. I think there's a chance that we see them on Thursday. Let me grab one more break here, and I want to talk a little bit about reintegrating these guys post injury. Today's show is brought to you by Adriana Lonick at Coldwell Banker Realty, and our promotion with Adriana that we have going is that if you set up a free consultation with her to begin learning how and where to buy or sell your home, to be entered to win a pair of lower level tickets. However many of you sign up for this or do a consultation with her, you'll be entered to win them. We'll get you some tickets there. But the biggest thing is, if you're buying or selling a home, you need help. You need somebody who knows where to get the ball rolling. I know Adriana has helped out a handful of listeners buy homes already. If you would like to contact Adriana and give this a try, you can go to thedancingrealtor.com and you can learn about all the different ways to set this up, get information. You can also just call or text her at 715-304-9920 to book that strategy session. And like I said, mention this podcast when you connect with her, and you'll be entered to win a pair of free Timberwolves tickets. That's thedancingrealtor.com, 715-304-9920. All right, Britt, we were just talking about Randle and DiVincenzo a little bit before that break, and I think it seems like there's a chance that we see one or both of them as soon as Thursday in LA. I know it's a back-to-back Thursday, Friday, so maybe they just pick one of those 2 games to play, and I'd be surprised if they come back from injury and immediately play a back-to-back. But this is coming. The injured guys are set to return. And so in begins the test of how do you, how do you balance the tonic with the booze?
Especially as the schedule eases.
Yeah.
And also, we don't know. I mean, back spasms are a crazy thing, but Gobert is also part of this mix and very important in terms of how you use Randle.
For sure.
Because Randle will really come in handy as your big guarding classic bigs guy. And I mean, I continue to say that that's his stealth skill that this team still misses. I mean, that's as good as Jaden and Nas have been on defense, just being able to thwart somebody who's trying to turn around and, a Valanciunas type in the paint, a classic center, I think Randle would be really good at that. And then DiVincenzo, really looking forward to it because he does so many things well when he's on, and he also is a spark player. He's a catalyst player. He regards himself that way. He tries to play that way. And again, that kind of takes the pressure off a guy like Ant, who's got his own bag he's got to deal with, and he doesn't. To be inspirational in that way, the Wolves have missed that type of point guard. They have a really interesting panorama of point guards now that Nikhil has kind of settled into being like your classic John Paxton-like point guard, a guy, the Jordan sidekick kind of point guard. And then you've got Dilly, and you've got, obviously DiVincenzo, and you've got Conley. And that's a great span of players. And I'm not a huge fan of the small, backcourts, especially if you've got a small front court.
Yeah.
And so I don't want to see Conley beside another point guard usually, unless it's DiVincenzo. But even then, not necessarily. So I hope that, first of all, I hope that DiVincenzo hits the ground running. I don't know enough about him from his previous stints to know if he has that in him. I know that he got off to a really slow start this season, and after a great preseason. So that could be a huge X factor, in my opinion. If DiVincenzo, even more than Randle, because DiVincenzo is more of a team-wide catalyst, in my opinion. If
he's easy to see that fitting into this. Like if he just wouldn't have been hurt, or if he would have came back from his injury for the Houston game right after the All-Star break, been like, oh yeah, they could keep playing the way they were playing. He's just out there instead of Clark for a minute, or instead of Dillingham or whatever. Yeah.
And so if he comes back strong, that could be worth a couple of games in the standings coming the rest of the way, and that's great. I mean, that's something that there's going to be. I mean, Dallas is putting it together again. The Lakers are strong. Golden State is very strong. Sacramento, I don't fear that much given what they have, but that's the bottom of the play-in. Right now, they got to think about, the Clippers, the Warriors, the Mavericks. That whole group is going to be play-in or end of the first round automatic teams. And that's the way I see the Wolves right now. Denver, the Grizzlies, and perhaps the Rockets, I think, with the Thunder would be I will be surprised if they can get to that 4th seed, but that 5-6 seed, I think, is a good place to be because we've seen what they can do. They're 2-2 against the Thunder. They've beaten the Rockets. I mean, they've beaten the Rockets once. They've beaten the Nuggets and always play the Nuggets tough. I don't know. I get more optimistic about the puncher's chance of a first round upset than I do about like getting home court advantage, in the regular season.
Well, it's all the idea of, which we don't have a lot of experience with this with the Wolves, but kind of around the league, it's that veteran laden team who's reincorporating pieces to try and peak at the right time, and the Wolves have an opportunity to do that. sometimes that happens, and sometimes that doesn't in different places and different spots. What I've been saying, looking at stuff at the All-Star break, is what gives me some optimism is elements of this were working before the All-Star break, before these players started getting hurt, specifically with Randle, who was the sorest of the sore thumbs at the beginning of the season, sticking out antithetically to what the rest of what was going on. And now as I'm thinking about it and remembering how well Randle was playing before he did get hurt, I'm almost kind of ranking it like I think Dante will be the most seamless, then Julius, and then I don't know, maybe it's just reactionary to them playing so small and my own bias of liking some of this small style, but it almost seems like Rudy will be the most disorienting and just inherently will most change the way that they have to play, because Rudy isn't like we talk about like with Nas and Jaden of, oh, you need to tap into this skill set for this group or this pairing, or Ant or whoever it might be, or Mike, with this group, we need you to be more aggressive. You look for your shot more rather than your pass. Well, Rudy doesn't have multiple things.
Right.
All Rudy can do is all Rudy can do. The things Rudy can't do, he cannot do. And it is good to not let him try to do those things. So you are going to bring in the Rudy Gobert piece. That is just the Rudy Gobert piece. And it is kind of a situation where when he is out there, the other four players need to fit around him. That is just undeniable, I think.
Right.
With Randle and DiVincenzo, to me, it seems like there's some opportunity for them to be able to fit into what this group is currently doing to allow them to be the sum of their parts, maybe greater than the sum of their parts.
I would mostly agree with everything you just said. What I would say is one of the reasons that Gobert is inflexible is because he's especially strong at something. And having that thing sometimes is worth the penalty of not being as flexible.
Mm-hmm.
What I will also say is that where I would dock Randle is I don't see McDaniels being able to play the way he plays on the floor with Randle.
Fair. Yeah.
And that, they have to split those two guys up. And that will be an interesting thought exercise because, again, you got to figure out now, okay, Nas and McDaniel have really got something going on, but it's the whole, who doesn't want to play with Nas? Nas is great for Rudy. Nas is great for McDaniels. Nas is great for Randle. So where do you put Nas? Where are those precious Nas minutes going to be going to enable who,
Mm-hmm. So I think with the Nas versus Julius thing is, it's like there's a way to even start Julius and allow Nas to play 30 plus minutes a night. Like you can make that happen, pretty easy. So that might be the case that, or what Finch is thinking in his head is like, okay, we're going to still start Randle again, but we're going to have Nas close games. And I think I would want them to look and really dig into another layer of it, which is about Julius starting that has nothing to do with Nas. The McDaniels, Gobert, and Randle front court does not work well together for fairly obvious basketball reasons. A complete non-shooter in Rudy Gobert, infrequent and largely ineffective three-point shooter in Julius Randle. Best of the three, but not a shooter.
I agree totally.
And then Jaden McDaniels, who has found a peak in his not only season but career recently by abandoning the three-point shot. So that's just three players who are not floor spacers. It's just that simple. And your best player, as we've learned over these last couple of weeks, and it's also very apparently obvious, it benefits from playing within space. And when, like, even when the Wolves are playing small and they're playing 5 out, the Thunder were doing boxes and elbows all 96 minutes or 101 minutes that these two teams played. Like, Ant needs the space to be able to do it. And if we could just put the like political Julius versus Nas and all those things away, it's like, man, just for basketball reasons and for your best player, we did learn something about the McDaniels, Randle, and Gobert trio, and that it just puts a bottleneck in the offense. Not because any of them are bad offensive players. Rudy is an extremely, effective offensive player. It went in his right spots, shooting a high percentage. We've seen Randle be able to be a secondary creator and also a playmaker, and we've seen Jaden be able to do it. They're not three bad offensive players. They are just undeniably a bad offensive fit in the context of the rest of the starting lineup, which is revolves around Anthony Edwards. So I'm fascinated to see how Finch tackles that element of it.
I will tell you a three-player lineup that I'm sure has not seen much at all that I would be very interested in watching. And that is Mike Conley, Rudy Gobert, and Terrence Shannon. I think that would be a really complimentary trio.
Why?
Because Shannon is a guy who gets to the rim, cuts, goes like a banshee. When Conley has the ball, he will create enough off-ball disruption for Conley to find things, enable Conley some. Rudy also, in his spacing and his habits, which Conley knows like the back of his hand, creates things. It's two pieces that Mike Conley can quickly figure out and maximize his own game with. And then depending on who else is on the floor, you have inside threats, and yet you have Mike as an outside threat. Hopefully, if his three is still there, it signs, I think, that while he's not as great as he was last couple of years, he's not a bad three-point shooter right now. And then whoever else you put out there is like gap fillers. I think you probably need another outside scorer. Maybe it's Clark. Yeah. I don't know who the others are, but I just think that three-player combination, if there is a player who won't get in Gobert and Conley's way, who will actually also actively help them, I think it's the constant movement and brutishness of TJ.
Yeah, no, I see that. I like that. I mean, it's so hard to even start playing the game of,
I know,
because I can go to, well, are we sure he's even going to play, Britt?
But these are crucial decisions by Finch and his staff too.
I know, and again,
just don't go back to the status quo.
I don't think that. And when we've asked Finch about it, the way he's kind of clearly had totally made a decision
about a lot, whether or not he changes anything. He certainly thinks about changes.
He is just like, I think it's going to be a thing where some guys play some nights and some guys don't the other nights. And
I hope so. I really hope so.
That makes, that just makes sense because Jason and I were talking yesterday after the great Jalen Clark game and raving about Jalen Clark, but also being like, if a team doesn't have numerous perimeter creators, then maybe you don't need to play Jalen Clark that night. It's the Bucks thing you and I were talking about a couple weeks ago, whatever that be. In that game, he wasn't that relevant. It is going to be about picking and choosing the spots. And I think just the biggest thing is just setting aside the idea of trying to get familiarity within the group and just playing some chess, and what do we need on this night versus the other night? And I think sometimes players coming back from injury, are more receptive to that than just a pure demotion or something. I do think there's probably an on-ramp into finding a rhythm with a rotation and who plays night to night that is variable, It doesn't seem impossible to me to find a rhythm with it, even though at times it's going to be uncomfortable, or you're going to look at the box score after some games and be like, whoa, this person only played 14, or this, it's just,
it also exposes a coach to second guesses, which I don't think Finch really cares about. I think he has a thick skin when it comes to the public, but also Finch likes to prior communicate in a very direct way what he's going to do with his players. And what that means is he likes to have a lot of foreknowledge about what he's going to do so he can communicate it. And I think it's going to be a hard adjustment for him if he's more of an in-game manager of his rotations, which I think you do have to be to really be true to the spirit of what we're talking about. Sometimes you can make assumptions about how a matchup is going to work out or how a 3-on-3 dynamic is going to work, and it doesn't work that way at all. And then you're going to have to adjust. And so I would like to see more of that, because I'm tired of the Chris Finch is a genius talk at the same time that we see that Chris Finch's genius seems to be in making players feel good about themselves and having a really cohesive, synergistic locker room, which is not a bad thing. It's a really important thing for a coach. But there's another side of genius too, and it's X's and O's and strategy. And he is much more passive than I want him to be in those things, especially if you talk to him for any amount of time, like I do in those preseason things. The guy, like all coaches, but he's one of the ones I've talked to a lot. He knows the game so intimately that he's got that stuff in his bag. I think he prioritizes player relationships more than that. And I think that's going to be it's going to be an adjustment for him if he goes into the territory of monkeying around a little bit more with the rotations.
I think it's to be a good test for his best friend relationship with Micah Nori, because I think it's going to be a complicated thing night to night, kind of mapping it out, but also having a familiarity.
Micah's the guy who is like, he's the one that keeps the chart, who keeps this is what we're doing here at this point in time. Yeah.
And obviously those two have a incredible relationship, but it's like, they're just going to have to be dynamic with it, as they have been since the Phoenix game. This team has been playing very dynamic rotations night to night. Who plays, who doesn't play. Obviously, a lot out of necessity due to the injuries, but there's last night as a perfect example of the groups that they're rolling with to have the comeback. I mean, it's another one of those things I talk about, where there were some things that were working before the All-Star break, before the guys got injured. I think they already broke up the dogmatic nature of the rotation some, that they could more seamlessly fit into whatever the new one would be, even if it's going to be complicated. Got anything else we need to get to? I feel like we have a million things to talk about here, but we're almost up to 90 minutes.
No, I'm good. We'll hit it again. I mean, I think I do want to set the table on this, because and obviously I'm with you once a week. You do these 4 times, so your table has been set. You've eaten and you've set the table again already numerous times. But I do think that what fans should be watching is the fact that the 8 starters rhetoric has to get tossed, because if you have 8 starters, that means there's not any room for anybody else. If you're saying 8 guys need to play 30 minutes, well, guess what? That's 240 minutes.
Right.
So, you really do have to, as you say, either go game by game or rotation by rotation in terms of how you want to stagger and how you want to mix and match and how dynamic you want to be. But you cannot, there will be active dislike and probably appropriate dislike unless they turn out to suddenly crank off 70% of their games won coming out. If he goes back to the old template, that's going to create an interesting feedback loop. With both folks like us and people who are diehard fans in the stands or on TV.
Yeah, I'm just excited to see it, man.
Yeah, me too. I think it's a fascinating thing, because the problem is too much talent, not enough collaborated yet, and what you need to do is increase the amount of collaborations so your research has more legitimate information in it.
Yeah. No, it's not easy. I'll stand on that. It's not easy. It's not just as simple as play Dillingham or bench Gobert or any of those other things. It is it's going to be a test. And this has been the season I guess maybe that last Tibbs year, but the most I've felt the fan base, kind of revolt against the head coach, and now he has an opportunity to kind of spin it,
Well, and also you have to. What I always try to keep in mind is 3 bad games in a row can really solidify some people for a while,
Yeah.
and people are going to go into slumps, and people, what are the trend lines over 2 weeks or over a month or whatever, and also what he did with Julius Randle indicates that those guys have a lot of respect for each other. That is not a fit that should be as productive as it's been. And at the same time, it's probably one of the biggest debits against his reputation right now among the fan base. So you can't win for trying. At the same time, I'm one of the guys that's been calling for Nas over Randle all goddamn year. So here you go.
Yeah, you have. It's gonna be fun. It's gonna be fun. I'm really looking forward to Thursdays against the Lakers, and I don't know. Yeah, Luka, but also probably. I mean, I would assume at least one of Randle, DiVincenzo, and Gobert play in that game, right? And someone begins the process.
Don't mess with Jaden McDaniels, man.
I don't know.
That dude, he's right now he's in the crystallization phase. I want to make sure all those components are locked in before we monkey with him again.
I do think we know that Chris Finch will be intentional about that. Finch has
he likes McDaniels,
yes, he has a soft spot for him. I would just to the listeners, I would really recommend not only reading Britt's piece on the game last night. It's I do actually think games like that are a time where like writers can really shine even more than podcast has. Just Britt doesn't normally write gamers, but that one read more like a gamer. I thought Jace's was really good last night. John and Chris as well. It's like it was just fun to kind of knowing how all 4 of you think, to kind of read all 4 of you your distillations of what that game was last night. So obviously you all listeners know all of them from talking here on the pod, but I really would recommend just for yourself, go revel in that game. That was fun, man. If you're a fan of the Wolves, like that was a fun experience, and they did a good job of documenting it, and then also John and Chris were both in Oklahoma City for that game to get quotes from that too, and ask the questions so that we have the Finch quote and those sort of things. For me, when I'm not on the road, huge they really strengthen the show by doing it. So check out Britt's over at Mim Post. I thought he did a great job at his. I'm sure that'll be up by the time this episode is posted as well. Britt, we'll have you back sometimes next week. We're in one of those kind of navigating sort of things for listeners. Britt kind of replaced Chris this week because Chris today on Tuesday is flying from Oklahoma City to LA to cover that Lakers game. But Chris is going to join us tomorrow morning, and I'm looking forward to that because I wasn't in the locker room or at the press conferences or in the building, and I think Chris will have a unique perspective on that as well. So that's what's coming up next. Chris Hine Wednesday, and then we'll close out the week with Kyle on Friday after that Lakers game. Again, you guys can read Britt over at Mim Post, or you can read Britt's explicit laden tweets over at X. Follow him on Twitter there as well at Britt Robson. Until Wednesday morning with Chris, he's Britt. I'm Dane. Peace out.
How I'm feeling, man, I hope it never stop, yeah. Green and hot so you can find me in the crowd, yeah. Don't let standards ever bring you down, yeah.